Blood trickled down Eleanora Washington's temple as Officer Rayburn towered over her collapsed form. From inside the house, a low growl emerged. Caesar's teeth flashed white against his dark muzzle. Behind him, Dr. Marcus Washington's voice crackled through the phone. "Everything's recording, officer. Everything. Before we dive deeper into this shocking confrontation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to follow Eleanora's fight for justice against a system that failed her. Can an elderly black woman and her son stand against police brutality? Let's find out." The morning sun cast dappled shadows through the magnolia trees as Eleanora Washington knelt in her garden, carefully tending to her prized azaleas. At 68, her hands showed the weathered dignity of decades spent nurturing both plants and young minds as the first black principal of Oakwood Elementary. The prestigious Oakwood suburb in Georgia had not welcomed her with open arms 30 years ago when she and her late husband became one of the first black families to purchase a home in the historically white neighborhood. Even now, with her immaculate Victorian home and award-winning garden, she felt the sidelong glances from certain neighbors, the subtle ways they questioned her belonging. She wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a smudge of rich soil on her forehead as she adjusted her wide-brimmed hat. The garden was her sanctuary, each flower and shrub placed with intention, creating a haven that had been featured twice in Southern Living magazine. 3 houses down, Karen Mitchell peered through her blind's phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, there's a suspicious person in the Washington yard. I don't think she belongs there." Karen had moved to Oakwood just 5 years ago and had made it her personal mission to maintain neighborhood standards. She'd never bothered to meet her elderly neighbor despite Nora's attempts at friendship. Officer Bradley Rayburn received the call with a smirk. At 42, he had a reputation among the black residents of Oakwood County for his aggressive tactics and racial profiling. Twice he'd been investigated for excessive force, twice he'd been cleared by the department. His patrol car rolled slowly down Magnolia Street, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Nora in her garden, wearing overalls and gardening gloves. He didn't see a respected educator, he saw a target. The patrol car stopped abruptly in front of Nora's house, and Rayburn emerged, hand resting on his holster. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification right now," he barked, not bothering with introductions or explanations. Nora straightened slowly, her knees protesting after an hour of gardening. "Officer, may I ask what this is about? I'm just tending to my garden." Her voice carried the measured calm of someone who'd managed classrooms of unruly children for decades. Rayburn took 3 quick steps onto her property. "We received a report of a suspicious person. ID now." His hand remained on his holster, his stance wide and intimidating. Nora's spine stiffened, dignity rising within her. "Young man, I am Eleanora Washington. This is my home. I've lived here for 30 years. There's no suspicious person here, except perhaps you approaching me with such disrespect." Rayburn's face darkened. "Listen, lady, I don't care if you've been here 1 day or 100 years. When an officer asks for ID, you provide it immediately." Nora reached for her phone on the garden bench. "I'm going to call my son. He's a doctor at Atlanta Memorial, and he can verify who I am since you seem incapable of basic courtesy." Rayburn's hand moved faster than Nora could track. "She's reaching for something," he shouted, though there was no one else present. His hand closed around Nora's wrist with bruising force, twisting until she cried out and dropped her phone. "That's assaulting an officer," he growled, though Nora had made no move toward him. With a violent shove, he pushed the elderly woman backward. Nora lost her balance, tumbling against the stone garden bed she'd built with her husband decades ago. Her head struck the corner with a sickening crack. Warm wetness immediately began flowing from her temple. Through blurring vision, she saw Rayburn speaking into his radio, requesting backup for a combative suspect who assaulted an officer. Shock and pain made it difficult to focus, as Rayburn roughly flipped her onto her stomach, pressing his knee into her back as he fastened handcuffs around her wrists. "Please," she gasped the pressure, making it difficult to breathe. "I'm 68 years old. I need medical attention." Rayburn ignored her pleas, tightening the cuffs until they bit into her skin. From behind curtains and blinds, neighbors watched. Walter Green, an elderly white Vietnam veteran, shook his head in disgust, but remained inside. The young black couple, who had recently moved in across the street, began filming discreetly from their window. Nora, face pressed against the soil of her beloved garden, blood soaking into the earth she had tended for decades, had a terrifying thought. After all, she had lived through, after marching for civil rights in her youth, after breaking barriers as an educator, after raising a successful son on her own after her husband's death, she might die here, brutalized on her own property. Another statistic in America's ongoing tragedy of racial violence. The taste of soil and blood mixed in her mouth as darkness threatened the edges of her consciousness. Dr. Marcus Washington's hands remained perfectly steady as he navigated the delicate structures of his patient's brain. At 38, he had become one of Atlanta Memorial Hospital's most respected neurosurgeons, known for taking on high-risk cases that other doctors avoided. The operating room was silent except for the steady beep of monitors and Marcus's occasional requests for instruments. "Suction here, please," he murmured to the surgical resident assisting him. The procedure was going well, the tumor separating cleanly from the surrounding tissue. His concentration was absolute, a skill he'd developed early in life. As a black boy growing up in Oakwood, focusing amid hostility had been a survival tactic. His mother had taught him that excellence was his armor in a world that would scrutinize his every move. The operating room door opened slightly, and the head surgical nurse poked her head in. "Doctor Washington, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent situation. Your mother." Marcus didn't look up from his work. "Whatever it is, we'll have to wait, Janet." "We're at a critical point," the nurse hesitated. "Sir, Dr. Patel is available to take over." "It's your mother. The neighbors are saying there's police at her house and she's been injured." For the first time in his surgical career, Marcus's hands trembled slightly. "Show me," he said, his voice tight. The resident beside him looked alarmed as the nurse held up her phone, displaying a series of frantic text messages from Marcus's neighbors. The final message contained a link to a live feed from his mother's doorbell camera. On the small screen, he could see his mother's garden and the back of a police officer standing over something on the ground. When the officer shifted, Marcus saw his mother's crumpled form, blood visible on her face. "Get Dr. Patel." Now Marcus ordered, his voice deadly calm. The nurse was already moving. Dr. Patel arrived within 2 minutes, quickly assessing the situation as Marcus briefed him on the procedure's status. "I've got this, Marcus," Dr. Patel assured him. "Go." As Marcus stepped away from the operating table, Dr. Chen, the chief of surgery, entered the room. "Washington, you cannot abandon a patient mid-surgery. It violates every protocol we have." Marcus continued, removing his surgical gown. "My mother is being assaulted by police in her own yard. She's bleeding. I'm leaving." Dr. Chen stepped into his path. "If you walk out now, there will be consequences. The board will review your privileges." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "Then they'll review them. My mother raised me alone after my father died. Everything I am, I owe to her. There is no choice here." He brushed past the stunned administrator. In the doctor's locker room, Marcus changed in record time while making calls. The first was to James Wilson, his friend since law school, and now a prominent civil rights attorney. "James, my mother is being detained by police at her home. She's injured. I need you there now." The second call was to Captain Reynolds at the Oakwood Police Department. "This is Dr. Marcus Washington. Your officer is assaulting my 68-year-old mother at her home on Magnolia Street. If she isn't released and given medical attention immediately, the lawsuit will bankrupt your department." Reynolds' response was dismissive. "Dr. Washington, I'm sure my officers are following proper procedure. If your mother is being detained, there's a reason." Marcus ended the call, fury building in his chest. As he rushed to his car, he whistled sharply. Caesar, his Belgian Malinois, bounded from the special climate-controlled vehicle Marcus had designed for him. The dog moved with military precision despite being 8 years old. Caesar had been a police K-9 officer until his handler, Officer Michael Chen, was killed in the line of duty 3 years ago. Marcus had performed emergency surgery on the gravely wounded dog, removing bullet fragments lodged near his spine. During Caesar's recovery, a bond had formed, and when the police department retired, the traumatized K, the 9th of Marchcus, had adopted him. Few people knew that Caesar still retained all his police training, responding to specific Dutch commands that Officer Chen had taught him. Marcus had continued the training privately, partly as therapy for Caesar's PTSD, and partly because as a black man in America he never felt truly safe. Now, as they raced toward Oakwood, Marcus activated his mother's home security system remotely from his phone. The system he'd insisted on installing last year after a series of racially motivated incidents in the neighborhood. Through the app, he could access cameras, speakers, and even door locks. The live feed showed his mother now sitting on the curb, still handcuffed, blood dried on the side of her face. A second police car had arrived. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Despite his professional accomplishments, his status as a doctor, his community service, he'd experienced the bitter taste of racism throughout his life, being pulled over for routine checks in his Mercedes. Security following him in high-end stores. Patients requesting an American doctor when they saw his black face, despite his Harvard medical degree. His mother had prepared him for this reality from childhood, teaching him to be twice as good, twice as calm, twice as prepared. Now, all her warnings crashed together in his mind as he witnessed her humiliation and pain. As he approached Oakwood, his phone rang with a call from Walter Green, his mother's neighbor. "Marcus, they've got the street blocked off. You can't get through the main entrance." Marcus thanked him and took a detour, parking 3 blocks away. "Caesar still," he commanded in Dutch. The dog immediately became alert but silent, padding noiselessly beside him as they cut through backyards to approach his mother's house undetected. Through the neighbor's fence, Marcus could finally see the scene directly. His mother was now inside a police car, her head bowed. Officer Rayburn stood outside talking animatedly with another officer who seemed uncomfortable with the situation. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered at the perimeter, some filming with their phones. Captain Reynolds had just arrived, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. Marcus watched, calculating his approach, Caesar, a silent shadow beside him. He placed his hand on the dog's head, feeling the powerful muscles tensed and ready. "We're going to make this right," he whispered, though whether to Caesar or himself he wasn't sure. The residents of Magnolia Street had rarely come together as a community, their lives separated by invisible boundaries of race and class. But today, they were united by the spectacle unfolding in Eleanora Washington's front yard. Darius and Aisha Johnson, the young black couple who had moved in just 6 months ago, filmed steadily from their front porch. "This is going straight to Instagram and Twitter." Aisha whispered, her hands shaking with anger and fear. "The whole world needs to see this." Across the street, Walter Green leaned heavily on his cane, his Vietnam veteran cap pulled low over his eyes. At 75, he had seen enough injustice to recognize it instantly. "This ain't right," he muttered to his neighbor Patricia Wells. "That woman's done nothing but class up this neighborhood for decades." Patricia, a middle-aged white woman who had initially opposed the Washingtons moving onto Magnolia Street 30 years ago, nodded in silent agreement. Her views evolved through years of witnessing Nora's dignity and community contributions. 2 doors down, Thomas Mitchell had just returned from work to find his wife Karen watching anxiously from behind their curtains. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded when she explained her call to the police. Karen's face was pale. "I didn't think they would hurt her. I just thought they would check." Thomas cut her off. "You know exactly what happens when you call the police on black people in this neighborhood. Don't pretend otherwise." He grabbed his phone and jacket, heading for the door. "Where are you going?" Karen called after him. "To try to undo the damage you've done," he replied coldly. The neighborhood had a complicated history with race. When the Washingtons first moved in 3 decades ago, they'd found hateful notes in their mailbox and slashed tires on their car. Over the years, as more black professionals moved to Oakwood, the overt racism had evolved into something more insidious, smaller aggressions and exclusions. The Homeowners Association had tried 3 times to cite Nora for landscaping violations that were mysteriously never issues for her white neighbors. Yet there had also been progress. Walter Green had become one of Nora's closest friends after she helped his grandson get a scholarship to a prestigious university. Several younger families had deliberately chosen Oakwood for its growing diversity. The tension of these contradictory forces hung in the air as Officer Peter Collins, the second police officer on the scene, tried to make sense of the situation he'd been called into. At 26, Collins was still in his first year on the force. He had joined the police with idealistic notions of community service, inspired by an uncle who had been a respected sheriff in rural Georgia. Nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was witnessing. "Sir," he said quietly to Officer Rayburn, "the suspect is an elderly woman with a head injury. Department protocol says we should be calling medical services." Rayburn turned on him with undisguised contempt. "The suspect assaulted me during the course of my duties. She'll get medical attention after processing at the station." Collins glanced at Nora, noting her dignified posture despite the blood on her face and the handcuffs biting into her wrists. Nothing in her demeanor suggested a woman who would assault anyone, let alone a police officer. "Ma'am," he said, approaching her, "are you in need of immediate medical assistance?" Before Nora could answer, Rayburn stepped between them. "You don't talk to my suspect, rookie. Back off and secure the perimeter." Collins hesitated, then made a decision. Stepping away, he pulled out his phone and texted his direct supervisor about the situation. Meanwhile, the crowd of neighbors continued to grow. A news helicopter appeared overhead, drawn by police scanner reports of a disturbance. Inside the patrol car, Nora sat with her eyes closed, focusing on her breathing. The handcuffs cut painfully into her wrists, and the wound on her temple throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. She thought of her son, hoping someone had reached him, yet also hoping he would stay away. She had seen too many incidents where black men trying to help family members ended up victims themselves. Captain Reynolds arrived on the scene, his face a careful mask of professional neutrality. As the ranking officer present, he immediately began assessing the situation, noting the growing crowd, the news helicopter, and the obvious age and physical condition of the suspect. "Officer Rayburn report," he said crisply. Rayburn straightened his tone, shifting to formal professionalism. "Sir, I responded to a call about a suspicious person. Upon arrival, the suspect became combative, refused to identify herself, and reached for an unknown object. When I attempted to secure her, she struck me and resisted arrest." Reynolds looked pointedly at Nora's garden tools and phone, lying on the ground, then at the blood on the garden stones. "And the injury to her head," Rayburn shrugged. "She fell during the struggle." Reynolds's eyes narrowed slightly. He had known Bradley Rayburn for nearly 15 years and was well aware of the complaints that had accumulated in his file. Thus far, Reynolds had protected his officers, maintaining the thin blue line that separated police from scrutiny. But as he observed the elderly woman in the patrol car and the unmistakable signs of excessive force, something shifted in his assessment. Thomas Mitchell approached the police tape that had been set up around the perimeter. "Captain Reynolds," he called out, "I live next door. My wife made the call. There was no suspicious person, just Mrs. Washington gardening in her own yard." "This is a terrible mistake." Rayburn's head snapped around. "Sir, step back from the tape, or you'll be arrested for interfering with police business." Thomas stood his ground. "Captain Mrs. Washington is a respected member of this community. She needs medical attention, not arrest." Reynolds held up a hand to silence Rayburn before he could escalate further. "Thank you for the information, sir. We're assessing the situation." On social media, video clips of the incident were spreading rapidly. Number "Gardening While Black" began trending locally, then nationally. The police department's public affairs office was already being flooded with calls. Reynolds received a text from the chief of police. "Handle this carefully. Mayor's office involved now. Do you think Officer Rayburn should be immediately suspended for his actions against Eleanora Washington?" Comment number 1, if you believe he should face immediate consequences, or comment number 2, if you think we should wait for the full investigation. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow how this tense standoff continues to unfold. As Captain Reynolds tries to get control of the situation, what will happen when Dr. Copterin, Marcus Washington, arrives with Caesar? Will justice prevail, or will we witness another tragedy? Caesar had not always been Marcus Washington's companion. Born in Belgium and imported as a puppy, He had been selected for the elite K-9 unit of the Oakwood County Police Department for his intelligence drive and physical capabilities. His original handler, Officer Michael Chen, had been one of the few Asian American officers on the force, and together they had formed an exceptional team breaking department records in training exercises. From the beginning, Caesar showed an unusual ability to assess complex situations, distinguishing between actual threats and benign scenarios. Under Officer Chen's guidance, Caesar had specialized in suspect apprehension and evidence recovery, with additional training in personal protection. Their bond had been unbreakable, the dog responding to verbal commands in Dutch hand signals and even subtle body language cues that Officer Chen had patiently developed over years of partnership. In their 5 years of service together, they had apprehended 37 suspects, located 24 missing persons, and recovered evidence in dozens of major cases. The department had featured them in community outreach programs, school demonstrations, and recruitment materials. Then came the warehouse call that changed everything. Responding to reports of an armed robbery in progress, Officer Chen and Caesar had been first on the scene. Following protocol, Chen had waited for backup before entering, but when he heard what sounded like a hostage in distress, he made the decision to go in with Caesar. The ambush had been carefully planned. The suspects, part of a drug trafficking organization, had deliberately lured police to eliminate a specific officer who had been investigating their operation. It wasn't Chen they wanted, but he became their target of opportunity. The gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Officer Chen's body armor saved him from the first 2 shots, but the third caught him in the neck. As he fell, he gave Caesar his final command, "Beschirm, protect." Caesar had launched himself at the nearest shooter, taking him down with precision, despite being shot twice himself. The second suspect had fled, rather than face the determined animal. When backup finally arrived, they found Caesar standing guard over his fallen handler, bleeding but refusing to leave his side, growling warnings at anyone who approached. It had taken the K-9 unit commander using specific override commands to get Caesar to stand down so paramedics could reach Chen. Despite their efforts, Officer Michael Chen was pronounced dead at the scene. Caesar, suffering from 2 gunshot wounds, one dangerously close to his spine, was rushed to Atlanta Memorial's veterinary unit. Dr. Marcus Washington had been on call that night. Though his specialty was human neurosurgery, he had done research on comparative neural anatomy across species and had occasionally consulted on complex veterinary cases. When the emergency team explained the situation, Marcus volunteered to assist. The surgery lasted 7 hours, during which Marcus meticulously removed bullet fragments that threatened to paralyze the animal. The procedure required innovations in technique that Marcus later published in a veterinary medical journal. During Caesar's recovery, Marcus visited regularly, drawn to the dog's intelligence and evident grief. The K-9 officer reminded Marcus of himself after his father's death, outwardly functioning but carrying a profound sense of loss. The police department had planned to retire Caesar, concerned about potential PTSD and behavioral issues following the traumatic loss of his handler. When Marcus learned of this, he proposed adoption. Initially, the department hesitated, concerned about placing such a highly trained police animal in civilian hands. Marcus persisted, eventually securing approval by agreeing to work with the department's K-9 trainer on Caesar's transition. The retired K-9 trainer, Sergeant James Rodriguez, had worked closely with Marcus and Caesar for 6 months, teaching Marcus the Dutch commands and helping Caesar adapt to civilian life. During this time, Rodriguez noticed something remarkable. Caesar seemed to recognize that Marcus had saved his life. The dog's protective instincts transferred to the doctor, creating a new bond that, while different from what he'd shared with Officer Chen, was equally powerful. Marcus had also arranged for Caesar to undergo therapy dog training, discovering that the former police dog had a gentle side that emerged around patients, particularly children. For the past 2 years, Caesar had been a regular visitor at Atlanta Memorial's pediatric ward, bringing comfort to young patients facing serious illnesses. Marcus had obtained official service animal certification for Caesar, enabling the dog to accompany him in most settings. What very few people knew was that Marcus had maintained Caesar's police training through private sessions with Sergeant Rodriguez. The decision had been partly therapeutic for Caesar, who thrived with the mental and physical challenges of the exercises, and partly pragmatic for Marcus, who had experienced enough racist encounters to value having protection. Caesar retained all his tactical training, responding instantly to specific Dutch commands that activated different protocols from basic protection to more aggressive intervention. Marcus had never needed to use these commands in a real situation, but he practiced them regularly, with Caesar maintaining the dog's sharp skills. The most serious command verdedigen would signal Caesar to use maximum force to neutralize a threat. Marcus had vowed never to use this command except in life-threatening situations. As they now approached Nora's house through the neighbors' yards, Caesar moved with the silent efficiency of his police training, alert to every sound and movement. Marcus could feel the tension in the animal's body, a reflection of his own coiled anger and fear. When they reached the fence that bordered his mother's property, Marcus paused, assessing the scene. His mother was now in the police car, her posture suggesting pain and exhaustion. Officer Rayburn stood nearby, his aggressive stance communicating hostility even from a distance. Captain Reynolds appeared to be attempting to defuse the situation, though with limited success. Marcus placed his hand on Caesar's head, feeling the dog's muscles tense in response to his own emotions. "Rustig," he whispered the Dutch command for calm. Caesar's breathing slowed, but his attention remained fixed on the officers, particularly Rayburn. Years of training and instinct had taught the dog to recognize threats, and everything in his posture indicated that he identified Rayburn as dangerous. Marcus watched as his mother was roughly pulled from the car by Rayburn, ostensibly for Captain Reynolds to speak with her. The officer's unnecessary force, the dismissive way he handled an injured elderly woman, sent a surge of protective rage through Marcus that he struggled to contain. Beside him, Caesar gave a low growl so quiet only Marcus could hear it. "I know," Marcus whispered. "Soon." He reached for his phone and activated the audio feature of his mother's home security system, preparing for what would come next. The situation in front of Eleanora Washington's home balanced on a knife's edge as Captain Reynolds attempted to regain control. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his tone professionally neutral. "Can you tell me your version of events?" Nora straightened, as much as her handcuffed position would allow dignity emanating from her despite her disheveled appearance and the dried blood on her face. "I was gardening on my own property when this officer approached me aggressively, demanding identification without explaining why. When I reached for my phone to call my son, he attacked me, claiming I was reaching for a weapon." Reynolds' gaze shifted momentarily to the gardening tools and cell phone, still lying in the yard. "And the injury to your head," Nora's voice remained steady. "He pushed me. I fell against the stone border of my garden." Officer Rayburn stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "She's lying, Captain. She became combative when I asked for ID, then reached suddenly for something. I followed protocol for a potentially dangerous suspect." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. A 68-year-old woman gardening in broad daylight was a potentially dangerous suspect. Rayburn's jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, you weren't here. I made a judgment call based on the situation as I assessed it." Officer Collins, who had been maintaining the perimeter, approached cautiously. "Captain Mrs. Washington appears to be in distress. She's been requesting medical attention since I arrived." Nora had indeed begun to show signs of medical distress. Her breathing had become labored, and she swayed slightly where she stood. Reynolds noticed and made a decision. "Remove the handcuffs, Officer Collins. Call an ambulance." Rayburn stepped between them, his hand raised in protest. "Sir, that violates protocol for a combative suspect who assaulted an officer." Reynolds's patience visibly thinned. "Officer Rayburn, I am giving you a direct order. Stand down." Something in Rayburn snapped. "You're going to take her side." Another entitled black person who thinks the rules don't apply to them. The naked racism in the statement created a momentary silence. Reynolds stared at Rayburn, reassessing everything he thought he knew about an officer he'd supervised for years. Nora's eyes widened in recognition as she truly looked at Captain Reynolds for the first time. "Timothy Reynolds," she said softly. "You were in my first class at Oakwood Elementary when they integrated the school." Reynolds's professional mask slipped momentarily. Yes, ma'am. 5th grade, 1985. You wrote that essay about wanting to be a police officer to protect people. Nora continued, her voice growing fainter. I still remember it. A complex emotion crossed Reynolds's face memory, colliding with present reality. The captain who had spent years upholding the thin blue line protecting officers like Rayburn from consequences suddenly found himself face to face with the teacher who had believed in him when few others did. Officer Collins had moved to Nora's side, supporting her as she grew more unsteady. She needs to sit down, Captain, he said urgently. Reynolds nodded. Take her to the shade. Remove those handcuffs immediately. Rayburn moved to block them, his hand dropping to his holster. Captain, I cannot allow a suspect who assaulted me to be released on scene. Reynolds stepped directly into Rayburn's space, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Officer Rayburn, you are bordering on insubordination. Stand down now or surrender your badge and weapon. From his position at the property line, Marcus watched the confrontation unfold, cataloging every violation of protocol, every escalation by Rayburn. Caesar remained perfectly still beside him, awaiting commands. Through the surveillance system on his phone, Marcus could hear the exchange clearly. He watched as his mother's condition deteriorated, fury and fear battling within him. Officer Collins had managed to get Nora seated in the shade of her prized magnolia tree. But Rayburn continued to object vociferously, his language becoming increasingly inappropriate. This is why these people think they can get away with anything, Rayburn was saying, gesturing toward the gathering neighbors. We give them an inch, they take a mile. Reynolds's patience finally evaporated. Officer Rayburn, you are relieved of duty pending review. Surrender your weapon and badge to me now. Instead of complying, Rayburn stormed toward Nora and Collins. This isn't over. She's coming to the station one way or another. He grabbed Nora's arm, roughly pulling her to her feet. Nora cried out in pain, the color draining from her face. Reynolds and Collins both moved to intervene, but Rayburn was already dragging Nora toward his patrol car. I'm feeling chest pain. Nora managed to gasp, her free hand pressing against her sternum. Collins looked alarmed. Captain, she needs medical attention now. This could be a heart attack. Rayburn ignored them, continuing to pull Nora toward the car. She's faking it. They always do. As he reached the car, Collins managed to slip his personal phone into Nora's pocket, whispering, Call your son. For a brief moment, while Reynolds was occupied with radioing for medical support and Rayburn was opening the car door, Nora managed to extract the phone and dial Marcus's number. Marcus, she whispered when he answered, her voice barely audible. I love you, baby. Don't come here. It's too dangerous. Marcus's heart clenched at the fear in his mother's voice. Mom, I'm already here. Stay calm. Help is coming. Before she could respond, Rayburn noticed the phone. With a curse, he snatched it from her hand and threw it to the ground, stomping on it deliberately. Attempting to contact accomplices, he snarled, shoving Nora into the back seat with such force that her leg caught in the door as he slammed it shut. Nora's scream of pain was audible even from Marcus's position. It was the final straw. Marcus turned to Caesar, who had been growing increasingly tense as he sensed his owner's distress and witnessed the violence. Volg Marcus commanded quietly, the Dutch word for follow. Together they moved silently along the property line, approaching from an angle that would bring them into the front yard without immediately being spotted by Rayburn. Captain Reynolds had rushed to the patrol car upon hearing Nora's scream, ordering Rayburn to open the door immediately. As Reynolds turned to check on Nora's condition, he caught a glimpse of Marcus and Caesar approaching from the side yard. A flash of recognition crossed his face, but he deliberately turned away, focusing on Nora instead. Marcus activated the external speakers of his mother's security system through his phone. His voice suddenly boomed from the house, causing everyone in the yard to freeze. Officer Rayburn, this is Dr. Marcus Washington. You are being recorded assaulting my mother on her own property. Every action from this point forward will be documented and provided to the media, the district attorney, and our attorneys. Rayburn's head snapped toward the house, then to the approaching figures of Marcus and Caesar. His hand moved to his weapon. Stop right there, he shouted. Keep that dog restrained or I will shoot. Marcus continued his steady approach, Caesar perfectly healed beside him. "I am the homeowner's son," Marcus stated clearly, his voice carrying to the neighbors, filming, and the news helicopter overhead. "I am approaching to provide medical assistance to my injured mother. My service animal is under control." Captain Reynolds stepped between Rayburn and Marcus. "Dr. Washington, please identify yourself clearly for the record." Marcus held up his hospital ID and medical license. "Dr. Marcus Washington, Chief of Neurosurgery at Atlanta Memorial Hospital. I am here to provide emergency medical care to my mother, who appears to be in acute distress." Rayburn's face contorted with rage. "That's not a service dog, that's a police K-9. He has no right to have that animal." Reynolds ignored him, addressing Marcus directly. "Your mother complained of chest pains. An ambulance has been called." Marcus nodded his thanks, continuing his approach. Rayburn, seeing his authority slipping away, made a fatal error in judgment. He drew his weapon, pointing it alternately at Marcus and Caesar. "I said stop. That dog is a threat." Caesar remained perfectly calm beside Marcus, giving no indication of aggression despite the weapon pointed at them. The neighbors gasped collectively, several shouting protests. Reynolds immediately turned on Rayburn. "Holster your weapon now, officer. That is a direct order." In that moment of distraction, Marcus closed the distance to the patrol car, where his mother sat, trapped, her leg still caught in the door. As Marcus knelt to examine her, Rayburn lunged forward, grabbing his shoulder. "Get away from my suspect." The contact triggered Caesar's protective instinct. A low growl rumbled from the dog's chest, though he remained in position without attacking, awaiting commands. Marcus looked directly at Officer Collins. "Please open this door immediately. My mother requires urgent medical attention." Collins didn't hesitate, moving to the car despite Rayburn's shouts of protest. As the door opened, revealing Nora's leg already swelling from what appeared to be a fracture, Marcus felt Rayburn's grip tighten painfully on his shoulder. "You're interfering with police business, doctor, or not?" Rayburn hissed. Marcus kept his focus on his mother, his voice deadly calm. "Officer Rayburn, remove your hand from my person immediately. You have already committed assault, false imprisonment, and excessive force against my mother. Don't add to the charges." Rayburn's response was to wrench Marcus away from the car with enough force to throw him off balance. Captain Reynolds and Officer Collins both moved to intervene, but not quickly enough. Nora, seeing her son manhandled, attempted to exit the vehicle despite her injuries. Her momentum and Rayburn's continued aggression caused her to fall from the car onto the pavement, a cry of pain escaping her as her injured leg took the impact. The sight of his mother falling, the sound of her pain, shattered Marcus's professional control. Caesar, sensing the shift, tensed beside him, awaiting the command that both knew was coming. The scene in front of Eleanora Washington's home exploded into chaos as Marcus rushed to his fallen mother, Caesar, staying precisely at his side despite the tension crackling in the air. Mom Marcus knelt beside Nora, his trained medical eye quickly assessing her condition. The head wound had reopened, blood trickling fresh down her temple. Her breathing was labored, her pulse rapid and irregular under his fingers. Most concerning was her right leg, clearly fractured from being caught in the car door and further injured in the fall. Officer Rayburn advanced on them, baton now drawn. "Step away from the suspect," he ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Captain Reynolds moved to intercept him. "Officer Rayburn, stand down immediately." Reynolds' command went unheeded as Rayburn circled, trying to get to Marcus and Nora. Marcus positioned himself protectively over his mother, one hand on Caesar's back to keep the dog steady despite the clear threat. "My mother needs immediate medical attention," Marcus stated, his voice carrying clearly to the crowd and the news helicopter overhead. "She has a probable concussion, signs of cardiac distress, and a fractured tibia. I am a licensed physician providing emergency care." Rayburn's face contorted. "You're interfering with a police arrest. Get that attack dog away from my suspect now." Caesar remained perfectly still, though every muscle in his powerful body was tensed and ready. His training allowed him to distinguish between a genuine threat and his handler's commands, and right now, despite every instinct pushing him to protect, he waited for Marcus's word. Officer Collins had pulled the first aid kit from his patrol car and now approached cautiously, offering it to Marcus. "Doctor, can I help?" Before Marcus could respond, Rayburn swung his baton, striking Collins's outstretched arm. "You're done as a cop, Collins, siding with them against your own." The naked racism in Rayburn's statement hung in the air, as Collins recoiled, clutching his injured arm. The crowd of neighbors gasped collectively. Several had their phones raised, streaming the unfolding drama live to social media. Among them, Thomas Mitchell stepped forward. "Captain Reynolds as a witness. I want to state clearly that my wife's call was a mistake. Mrs. Washington was simply gardening on her own property. There was never any suspicious activity." Rayburn spun toward him. "Stay back, civilian. This is police business." Reynolds had finally had enough. Drawing his own weapon, he pointed it at Rayburn. "Officer Bradley Rayburn, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Drop your weapon and baton and step away." The standoff between the two officers created a moment of stunned silence. Never had the residents of Oakwood witnessed such a public fracturing of police solidarity. Rayburn's face reflected shock, then betrayal, then a cold determination. "So that's how it is. You're choosing them over your own kind." Reynolds's expression remained impassive. "I'm choosing the law which you've violated repeatedly in the past 15 minutes. Drop your weapons now." Instead of complying, Rayburn made a desperate lunge toward Marcus and Nora, baton raised. "You people always get special treatment." Marcus, still crouched protectively over his mother, saw the attack coming but couldn't move without leaving her exposed. In that critical moment, he made a decision. Caesar Verdedig beperkt, the Dutch command, meaning defend with restraint, activated Caesar's tactical training. The Belgian Malinois launched into action with military precision, targeting Rayburn's weapon arm with a controlled bite designed to disarm rather than maim. Rayburn screamed in shock and pain, his baton clattering to the ground as Caesar maintained his grip, applying pressure without crushing. The officer's free hand reached for his sidearm. "He's got a police dog attacking an officer," Rayburn shouted. "Shoot it." In the confusion, Rayburn managed to draw his weapon. Caesar, trained to respond to armed threats, adjusted his tactics, releasing the arm to target the more dangerous weapon hand. As the dog switched position, Rayburn fired wildly. The bullet missed Caesar but grazed Captain Reynolds' shoulder, drawing blood. "Shots fired, officer down." Collins shouted into his radio, though Reynolds remained standing despite his injury. The report of gunfire created instant pandemonium. Neighbors scattered for cover, screaming. The news helicopter dipped lower for a better angle. Reynolds, despite his wound, kept his weapon trained on Rayburn. "Drop the gun now, Bradley." Last warning. Caesar had successfully latched onto Rayburn's gun hand, the pressure causing him to drop the weapon. With practiced efficiency, the dog then forced Rayburn to the ground, pinning him without causing further injury, a perfect police takedown. Marcus quickly issued another command. "Caesar, bewaken guard." The dog maintained his position, keeping Rayburn immobilized but unharmed. In the momentary calm that followed, Marcus turned his full attention back to his mother. "I need a backboard neck collar and the AED from the patrol car," he ordered Collins, who moved immediately to comply. Captain Reynolds approached, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. "Doctor, Washington is that Michael Chen's dog?" he asked quietly. Marcus nodded as he continued examining his mother. "Yes. I adopted Caesar after Officer Chen was killed. He's a certified service animal now." Reynolds nodded slowly, understanding the implications. "Your mother needs an ambulance. It should be here any minute." The wail of sirens in the distance confirmed his statement. Marcus looked up at the captain, his expression grave. "She needs a trauma center, not a local hospital. Atlanta Memorial has the best neurological unit in the state. That's a 30-minute drive," Reynolds observed. "She needs immediate care." "I'm a neurosurgeon," Marcus replied. "I can stabilize her for transport." With clinical efficiency, Marcus began treating his mother's most urgent symptoms using the first aid supplies Collins had brought. Throughout, Caesar maintained his position, keeping Rayburn securely pinned, despite the officer's struggles and stream of racial invective. Additional police units arrived, officers emerging with weapons drawn at the reports of shots fired. They froze at the tableau before them, an officer pinned by a police dog, their captain bleeding, but standing guard and a black man performing medical procedures on an elderly woman. "Stand down," Reynolds ordered sharply. "Secure Officer Rayburn and place him under arrest for assault and reckless discharge of a firearm." The officers hesitated, confused by the order to arrest one of their own. Reynolds's next words left no room for misinterpretation. "That's a direct order. Officer Rayburn has violated multiple protocols, assaulted a civilian, and fired his weapon, injuring me in the process. Secure him now." Two officers finally moved forward, cautiously eyeing Caesar with uncertainty. Marcus gave another command, Caesar Los Latin, "Release." The dog immediately backed away from Rayburn, returning to Marcus's side but maintaining a vigilant posture. The officers quickly handcuffed Rayburn, who continued to shout accusations and racial slurs as they led him away. The ambulance arrived, paramedics rushing forward with equipment. Marcus briefed them on his mother's condition, his professional demeanor at odds with the chaos around them. Probable concussion, cardiac arrhythmia, fractured right tibia, possible internal injuries from rough handling. She needs transport to Atlanta Memorial's Trauma Center. The lead paramedic recognized Marcus. "Dr. Washington. What happened here?" Before Marcus could answer, Nora regained consciousness, her eyes focusing with difficulty. "Marcus, you shouldn't be here. It's not safe for you." Marcus took his mother's hand. "It's okay, Mom. You're going to be fine. We're taking you to my hospital." The paramedics efficiently transferred Nora to a stretcher, attaching monitors and starting an IV. As they prepared to load her into the ambulance, Marcus turned to Caesar. "He comes with us. He's a certified service animal." The paramedic looked dubious. "Doc, you know the protocols. We can't have a dog in the ambulance, especially not after it just attacked someone." Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his shoulder now bandaged by another paramedic. "That dog is a retired police K-9 officer who prevented further violence. He goes with them." The paramedic relented, though he insisted Caesar remain at the foot of the stretcher. As Marcus climbed into the ambulance beside his mother, he looked back at the scene Rayburn secured in a police car neighbor's, still filming the news helicopter circling overhead, and Captain Reynolds standing alone, looking suddenly older and wearier than his years. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The doors closed and the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing. In the back, Marcus held his mother's hand. While Caesar lay vigilant at their feet, the three of them bound together by blood, loyalty, and the shared experience of surviving another day as Black Americans in a country still struggling with its original sin. Do you believe Captain Reynolds made the right choice by finally standing up against Officer Rayburn's racist behavior? Comment number 1, if you think he should have intervened sooner, or comment number 2, if you believe he showed courage when it counted most. Hit that like button and subscribe to see what happens next in this powerful story of injustice and resistance. Will Eleanora receive the medical care she desperately needs? How will the police department respond to this incident that has now gone viral, and what consequences await Officer Rayburn for his actions? The ambulance raced toward Atlanta Memorial Hospital, sirens clearing a path through afternoon traffic as Marcus monitored his mother's vital signs with practiced precision. Nora drifted in and out of consciousness, her normally strong presence diminished by pain and shock. Caesar remained perfectly positioned at the foot of the stretcher, his disciplined stillness, a stark contrast to the urgent activity around him. The paramedic, initially skeptical about the dog's presence, had grown impressed by the animal's composure. "Her BP is dropping." Marcus noted his professional tone, masking the fear gripping his heart. "Push another bolus of fluids." As the paramedic complied, Marcus's phone rang with a call from James Wilson, the attorney he'd contacted earlier. "Marcus, I'm at the hospital waiting for you. The video is everywhere. CNN is running it live." Marcus kept his eyes on the cardiac monitor. "My mother has a concussion, probable fractured tibia, and she's showing signs of cardiac distress. Everything else is secondary right now." Wilson's voice softened. "I understand. I've already filed for an emergency injunction against the police department. They can't touch your mother without a court order now." Marcus thanked him and ended the call, returning his full attention to Nora as her blood pressure stabilized. Meanwhile, back at the Washington home, the aftermath of Caesar's intervention had thrown the Oakwood Police Department into unprecedented chaos. Officer Rayburn, handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, continued his tirade of racial slurs and threats, his words now being live-streamed by neighbors who had positioned themselves to record through the vehicle's open window. Captain Reynolds, his shoulder patched by paramedics, but refusing further treatment until the scene was secured, faced a growing crowd of officers, neighbors, and newly arrived media. "I want statements from every witness," he ordered Officer Collins, who was coordinating the response despite his injured arm. Body cam footage from every officer on scene, including Rayburn's. Collins hesitated. "Sir, Officer Rayburn's body cam appears to be off. It wasn't transmitting during the incident." Reynolds's expression hardened. "When did it stop transmitting?" Collins checked the log on his tablet. It shows disconnection approximately 2 minutes after his arrival on scene, before any physical contact with Mrs. Washington. The implication hung in the air between them. Rayburn had deliberately disabled his camera before escalating the situation, a direct violation of department policy. As if on cue, the police chief's SUV pulled up, followed closely by the mayor's vehicle. Reynolds straightened, preparing for the political storm about to engulf them all. At Atlanta Memorial, the trauma team waited at the ambulance bay, alerted by Marcus's call ahead. Dr. Patel, who had taken over Marcus's surgery earlier, stood at the front of the group. The ambulance doors opened to reveal Marcus still in physician mode despite the extraordinary circumstances. 68-year-old female head trauma, with brief loss of consciousness, cardiac arrhythmia, responding to treatment, obvious fracture of right tibia, multiple contusions and abrasions, he reported crisply as the stretcher was unloaded. The team moved efficiently, transitioning Nora to a trauma bay while continuing Marcus's treatment protocols. Caesar jumped down from the ambulance, staying precisely at Marcus's side as they followed the stretcher. Dr. Chen, the chief of surgery, who had threatened Marcus with consequences for abandoning his patient, stepped into their path. "Washington, you cannot bring that animal into my trauma center." Before Marcus could respond, James Wilson appeared beside them, legal documents in hand. The dog is a certified service animal, accompanying a physician responding to a family emergency. Any attempt to separate them would violate both ADA regulations and the emergency court order I've just obtained. Dr. Chen looked from the lawyer to Marcus, then to Caesar, who sat calmly, despite the hospital chaos around them. "Fine, but you're not treating your mother. You know the protocol about operating on family members." Marcus nodded. "Dr. Patel can lead. I'll consult only." This compromise reached, they continued to the trauma bay, where Nora was already being connected to monitors and receiving a more thorough assessment. Outside the hospital, a media circus was forming as news vans arrived, reporters broadcasting live updates about the gardening while black incident that had exploded across social media. The hospital's security team established a perimeter, keeping journalists at bay while allowing family members of other patients to enter unimpeded. Inside the police department, the command staff had gathered for an emergency meeting. The chief, a career officer 2 years from retirement, looked grim as he reviewed the preliminary reports. "Tell me straight, Reynolds. How bad is this?" Reynolds, his shoulder now properly bandaged, didn't sugarcoat the situation. "It's as bad as it gets, Chief. We have an officer on video assaulting an elderly black woman on her own property, without cause, resisting lawful orders from superior officers, and discharging his weapon during an altercation he initiated. The victim is a respected retired school principal, and her son is a prominent neurosurgeon who witnessed the assault. Their dog, a retired police K-9 with an exemplary service record, subdued Rayburn using proper police tactics when he became violent." The chief closed his eyes, briefly absorbing the magnitude of the disaster. "And Rayburn's body cam, conveniently turned off 2 minutes into the encounter," Reynolds confirmed. "But we have multiple civilian videos, dashboard cam footage from Collins's vehicle, and the live stream from the news helicopter." The department's legal counsel, a sharp-featured woman who had defended the force through numerous controversies, spoke up. "We need to get ahead of this." Issue a statement that Rayburn has been suspended pending investigation, express concern for Mrs. Washington's health, and emphasize that his actions don't reflect department values." The chief nodded, but Reynolds wasn't finished. "Sir, with respect, that's not going to cut it this time. We've used that playbook before with Rayburn, after previous complaints of excessive force against minority citizens. 3 times we've investigated him. 3 times we've found insufficient evidence of wrongdoing. Those reports will all be dug up by tomorrow morning." Silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. They weren't just dealing with a PR nightmare, they were facing potential federal civil rights charges and a department-wide investigation that could expose years of systemic issues. At the hospital, Nora's condition had stabilized enough for diagnostic imaging. The CT scan revealed a mild traumatic brain injury but no bleeding or severe swelling. The orthopedic team confirmed a clean break of the tibia that would require surgical repair, but had good prospects for full recovery. Most concerning was the cardiac workup, which showed stress-induced arrhythmia requiring careful monitoring. As Nora was prepared for surgery to repair her leg, Marcus stood at her bedside Caesar, a steady presence beside him. "Mom, you're going to be fine. Dr. Adeyemi is the best orthopedic surgeon in the state." Nora's eyes, clearer now that pain medication had taken effect, fixed on her son's face. "I told you not to come, baby. I was so afraid he would hurt you too." Marcus took her hand gently. "I couldn't stay away. Not when you needed me." A tear slipped down Nora's cheek. "You brought Caesar. Smart boy." She extended her other hand to the dog, who moved forward just enough to allow her to touch his head. "He protected us both," Marcus confirmed. "Just like he was trained to do, Doctor." Adeyemi entered, signaling it was time for surgery. As Nora was wheeled away, Marcus found himself suddenly confronted with the reality of what had transpired. The professional focus that had carried him through the crisis began to falter, allowing the full emotional impact to hit him. He leaned against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, Caesar immediately pressing against his side in a gesture of comfort. James Wilson found him there minutes later, joined by Darius and Aisha Johnson, the young couple from across the street who had filmed the initial incident. "Marcus, the video has 20 million views already," Aisha said gently, showing him her phone. "People are organizing protests outside the police department." Darius added Thomas Mitchell has given 3 interviews, saying his wife's call was racially motivated and that Officer Rayburn should be fired and prosecuted. Marcus nodded numbly, the magnitude of the situation beginning to register. His mother, his gentle, dignified mother, who had spent her life educating children and creating beauty, had nearly been killed for the crime of gardening while black. The familiar weight of this reality, a burden he had carried since childhood, threatened to crush him anew. Caesar sensed his distress, pressing closer and placing his head on Marcus's lap. The gesture broke through Marcus's professional reserve tears, finally coming as he buried his face in the dog's fur. "She could have died," he whispered, "if we hadn't gotten there." Wilson placed a hand on his shoulder. "But you did get there, and now we make them pay." By evening, Nora's surgery had been completed successfully, and she rested in recovery with Marcus and Caesar keeping vigil. The hospital administration, recognizing the public relations value of supporting their prominent neurosurgeon in his time of crisis, had reversed their initial objections to Caesar's presence, even providing a special bed for the dog in 2000, Nora's private room. Outside, the media encampment had grown with national news crews joining local stations. The hospital's public relations team had arranged for a brief statement from Marcus, scheduled for the following morning. As night fell, Captain Reynolds arrived at the hospital, his arm now in a sling from the bullet graze. Hospital security escorted him to Nora's room, where he found Marcus reviewing his mother's chart while Caesar lay alert at the foot of her bed. Dr. Washington Reynolds said quietly, not wanting to wake Nora, "May I speak with you?" Privately, Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded, following the captain into the hallway while signaling Caesar to remain with Nora. "How is she?" Reynolds asked. Genuine concern in his voice, stable Marcus replied. "The orthopedic surgery went well. We're monitoring her cardiac function and the concussion, but the prognosis is good for full recovery." Reynolds nodded relief, evident in his expression. I came to inform you personally that Officer Rayburn has been formally charged with assault, excessive use of force, reckless endangerment, and violation of civil rights. He's being held without bail pending arraignment." Marcus absorbed this information, his face giving away nothing, and the department's official position Reynolds met his gaze directly. No equivocation, no excuses. What happened to your mother was wrong, period. The chief is holding a press conference tomorrow morning to announce a full, independent investigation of not just this incident, but all previous complaints against Rayburn. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's unusually forthright for your department." Reynolds glanced toward Nora's room. "She was my teacher, you know. 5th grade when they first integrated the schools. White parents pulled their kids out of her class, but mine insisted I stay." He paused, emotion briefly, crossing his features. "She taught me about justice, about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. I failed her today by not stopping Rayburn sooner, but I won't fail her again." The sincerity in Reynolds' voice seemed genuine, but Marcus had learned caution through bitter experience. "Words are easy, Captain. Actions matter more." Reynolds nodded. "Fair enough. Judge me by what happens next." As he turned to leave, he added, "That's quite a dog you have. Chen would be proud of how you've continued his training." Marcus watched him go, wondering if the day's events represented a genuine turning point or merely a temporary accommodation in the face of overwhelming evidence and public outrage. Inside the room, Nora stirred, reaching out a hand that Caesar immediately moved to nuzzle. "Marcus," she called softly. He returned to her side, taking her hand. "I'm here, Mom. Everything's going to be okay." Nora's eyes, wise from decades of navigating America's racial complexities, held his. "This isn't over, baby. It's never that simple for us." Marcus nodded, the truth of her words settling heavily between them. "I know, but we're not alone this time." Caesar, as if understanding his role in this statement, stood at attention beside the bed, a silent guardian whose moment of action had helped turn the tide of an all-too-familiar tragedy towards something that might resemble justice. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Nora's private room, casting soft stripes across her sleeping face. Marcus, who had dozed in the recliner beside her bed, awoke instantly when the door opened. "Doctor." Chen entered, followed by the hospital's chief administrator, Dr. Victoria Blackwell. Caesar, who had maintained his vigil through the night, raised his head, but remained at his post. "Doctor," Washington Blackwell began without preamble, "we need to discuss your status." Marcus straightened, fully alert despite his exhaustion. "My mother is stable but requires continued monitoring. I've violated no hospital protocols since returning." Dr. Chen's expression remained stern. "You abandoned a patient mid-surgery yesterday. That alone is grounds for suspension of privileges." Before Marcus could respond, Blackwell held up a hand. "However, given the extraordinary circumstances and the fact that you ensured proper coverage before leaving the board, has decided not to pursue disciplinary action." Chen's jaw tightened visibly at this announcement. Marcus understood the politics at play. With videos of the incident dominating every news channel and social media platform, the hospital couldn't afford to appear unsympathetic to his situation. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'd like to request family medical leave to oversee my mother's recovery." Blackwell nodded. "Already approved. Your surgeries have been reassigned for the next 2 weeks." As they discussed the administrative details, James Wilson arrived with breakfast and news. "The police chief's press conference is starting," he announced, turning on the room's television. The screen showed Oakwood's police chief, Michael Bennett, standing before a forest of microphones, his expression grave. "Yesterday, an incident occurred in our community that violated the trust placed in our department," he began. "Officer Bradley Rayburn's actions against Mrs. Eleanora Washington were contrary to our training, our policies, and our values. He has been terminated from the force and faces multiple criminal charges. We offer our sincere apologies to Mrs. Washington and her family for this inexcusable breach of public trust." Marcus and Wilson exchanged surprised glances at the unequivocal statement. Typically, police departments hedged with phrases like alleged incident and pending investigation. The chief continued. "Furthermore, I have requested that the State Attorney General appoint an independent prosecutor to review all previous complaints against former Officer Rayburn and to examine our internal investigation procedures. The press conference continued with reporters shouting questions about racial profiling and department culture. Meanwhile, Nora had awakened and was watching silently, her expression unreadable. When the broadcast ended, she spoke softly. Words, "We'll see about actions." Her skepticism was well-founded. By mid-morning, the narrative had already begun to shift as Rayburn's police union issued a statement defending him and questioning the rush to judgment. Cable news panels debated whether Caesar should be classified as a dangerous animal, with some commentators suggesting that Marcus had weaponized a police-trained dog against law enforcement. Outside the hospital, two distinct groups had formed. One, led by community activists and supporters, held signs with messages like "Justice for Nora" and "Black Lives Matter." The other, smaller but vocal, consisted of police supporters with thin blue line flags and signs, reading "Back the Blue and dogs are not above the law." Hospital security had established a perimeter, keeping both groups away from the entrance. Inside, Marcus received a call from Dr. Patel. "Your patient from yesterday, Mr. Goldstein, is experiencing complications. Increased intracranial pressure that's not responding to standard interventions." Marcus immediately focused. What's his status? As Patel described the deteriorating condition, Marcus realized he faced an impossible choice. His mother needed him, but his patient, a 55-year-old father of 3 who had trusted Marcus with his life, was in critical danger. Nora, who had been listening, spoke up. "Go to your patient, Marcus." "I'll be fine." Marcus hesitated, torn between professional duty and filial devotion. "Mom." After what happened, Nora's expression brooked no argument. "I raised you to honor your commitments. That man and his family are counting on you. I have plenty of people looking after me." As if to emphasize her point, Aisha Johnson arrived with flowers and Walter Green with homemade soup. Caesar would remain with Nora, his protective presence, a comfort to both mother and son. Marcus made his decision. "I'll set up a video link so I can consult on Mr. Goldstein's case while monitoring Mom remotely." Using the hospital's advanced telemedicine system, Marcus established a connection to the operating room while remaining in his mother's room. For the next 4 hours, he guided Dr. Patel through a delicate procedure to relieve the building pressure in their patient's brain, his calm voice providing crucial direction at critical moments. When the procedure was successfully completed, applause broke out in both rooms. The innovative approach to the crisis would later become a case study in medical journals. While Marcus was engaged with saving his patient, a new battle was brewing. Officer Rayburn's attorney had arrived at the hospital with animal control officers and a court order. This document authorizes the seizure of the dog known as Caesar for evaluation as a dangerous animal, the attorney announced to hospital security. He attacked a police officer and poses an ongoing public safety risk. The security supervisor, a former military police officer himself, examined the order carefully. This appears to require a hearing before any seizure can take place. It's not an immediate removal order. The attorney's face reddened. The animal is dangerous and should be secured pending the hearing. The animal said, James Wilson, who had been alerted by security, is a retired police K-9 with a distinguished service record now registered as a service animal. Any attempt to seize him without due process would violate multiple statutes. The standoff continued in the hospital lobby until Captain Reynolds arrived, his arm still in a sling. That court order, he said quietly to the animal control officers, was obtained without disclosing material facts about the animal's training and status. I've just spoken with Judge Harrison, who has stayed the order pending a full hearing. The attorney bristled. Captain, your client, Officer Rayburn, has rights too. That dog caused serious injuries. Reynolds' expression hardened. Former Officer Rayburn discharged his weapon in a residential area, endangering civilians, and shooting me in the process. If you want to discuss rights, counselor, we can start there. The attorney and animal control officers retreated, but it was clear this was only the opening salvo in what would become a protracted legal battle. By evening, Nora was strong enough to give her first statement to investigators. Marcus insisted on recording the interview with James Wilson present to protect his mother's rights. Detective Sarah Johnson from the State Attorney General's office conducted the interview with professional courtesy. Mrs. Washington, can you walk me through the events leading up to your interaction with Officer Rayburn? Nora's voice was steady as she recounted the details, her educator's precision evident in her clear chronology and specific descriptions. When she described Rayburn's initial approach and aggressive demeanor, Detective Johnson asked, "Had you encountered Officer Rayburn before yesterday?" Nora's response caught everyone by surprise. "Not personally, no. But in 1992, he was a rookie officer who participated in the arrest of my brother James during a traffic stop. My brother was severely beaten during that arrest. No charges were ever filed against the officers involved." Marcus stared at his mother in shock. She had never mentioned this incident to him. Detective Johnson made a note. "We'll look into that case. Mrs. Washington." As the interview concluded, Marcus finally asked the question that had been building since hearing this revelation. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me about Uncle James being beaten by police?" Nora's eyes held decades of carefully managed pain. "There are some burdens I didn't want you to carry, baby. Some knowledge that weighs too heavy." She sighed, adjusting her position carefully to accommodate her injured leg. "Your generation has social media and body cameras and cell phone videos. My generation had our word against theirs, and our word never seemed to count for much." The weight of this statement hung in the room, a reminder of the generational trauma that had shaped their family's navigation of American society. That evening, as news of Nora's statement spread, more people came forward with accounts of encounters with Rayburn. 3 former complaints previously dismissed for insufficient evidence were reopened. The FBI announced a civil rights investigation into patterns and practices at the Oakwood Police Department. Outside the hospital, the competing protests had grown occasionally, leading to tense verbal confrontations. Inside, Marcus received a disturbing phone call. "Dr. Washington, this is hospital security. We've received a credible threat against you and your mother. We're increasing patrols and restricting access to this floor." Marcus thanked them, then turned to Caesar, who had sensed the tension and was already on alert. "Looks like your protection skills might be needed again, boy." He made sure his mother's room had only one entrance, positioned Caesar where he could monitor all approaches, and settled in for what promised to be a long night. Around midnight, a nurse Marcus didn't recognize attempted to enter Nora's room, claiming she needed to administer medication. Caesar's low growl alerted Marcus, who checked the medication order and found no such prescription authorized. When questioned further, the nurse fled, escaping before security could apprehend her. The incident heightened everyone's awareness of the volatile situation. The following morning brought a new development. Captain Reynolds arrived with news. "We've uncovered evidence that Rayburn may have been targeting your mother, specifically Dr. Washington. His search history shows he looked up your address 3 weeks ago, shortly after you published that opinion piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about police reform." Marcus absorbed this information, the implications chilling. His public advocacy work, always a calculated risk, may have made his mother a target. Reynolds continued, "There's more. We found communications between Rayburn and several officers in neighboring jurisdictions that contain explicitly racist language and discussions of targeting prominent black professionals to, in their words, put them in their place. The evidence suggested a coordinated campaign of harassment and intimidation far beyond one rogue officer. As Reynolds shared these findings, Dr. Victoria Blackwell entered with an update on hospital security measures. "We've implemented a special protocol for Mrs. Washington's protection. Only staff on an approved list can access this floor, and all medications are being double verified." She hesitated, then added, "The hospital has also received some concerning communications. Threats to withdraw donations if we continue to harbor that dog, and support your family's anti-police agenda." Marcus wasn't surprised. Money and power had always aligned to maintain the status quo. And the hospital's position, Blackwell's answer was firm. We stand by our staff and patients, Dr. Washington. The board has issued a statement supporting you and your mother unequivocally. This institutional backing, while welcome, came with its own complexities. By afternoon, a press conference had been arranged. Against James Wilson's advice, but at Nora's insistence, Marcus agreed to make a public statement. With Caesar at his side and James Wilson flanking him, Marcus faced the assembled media in the hospital's conference room. My mother, Eleanora Washington, a retired educator who served this community for 40 years, was assaulted in her own garden for the crime of gardening. While black, he began his voice steady despite his exhaustion. This was not an isolated incident or the action of one officer, but the predictable result of systemic issues that remain unaddressed in police departments across this country. He outlined the factual timeline, correcting misinformation that had begun circulating about Caesar's actions and his mother's behavior. Caesar, a retired police K-9 with an exemplary service record, responded to a direct threat using the precise training provided by the police department itself. He did not maul or savage anyone. He performed a controlled takedown exactly as he was trained to do. Questions from reporters flew fast, many focusing on Caesar rather than the assault on Nora. Marcus addressed them patiently until one reporter asked Dr. Washington, "Some are saying that as a wealthy doctor you're out of touch with the challenges police face in high-crime areas. How do you respond?" Marcus's expression remained composed, but his answer carried the weight of lived experience. "My title and income don't shield me from being seen as a threat when I'm not in scrubs. 3 years ago I was pulled over driving home from a 36-hour shift and made to lie face down on the pavement at gunpoint because I matched the description of a suspect. The same system that allows officers to assault my elderly mother in her garden is the system that views me as inherently dangerous despite my contributions to this community." The press conference ended with Marcus thanking the hospital staff and the community members who had rallied in support. As he returned to his mother's room, he found her watching the coverage, tears streaming silently down her face. "You did good, baby," she said softly. "Your daddy would be so proud." Marcus sat beside her, taking her hand in his. Caesar jumped up on the bed at Nora's silent invitation, curling protectively at her feet. Together, the three of them represented 3 generations of the same struggle. Nora, who had marched for civil rights in her youth. Marcus navigating excellence as both armor and target. And Caesar, a symbol of how systems designed for protection could be redirected toward justice when in the right hands. Outside the window dusk settled over Atlanta, a city built by enslaved hands that now stood at another crossroads of its racial history. The Washington family's ordeal had become a national flashpoint, but for Nora and Marcus, it remained intensely personal. Another chapter in their ongoing navigation of an America, still struggling to live up to its promises. 6 months after what had come to be known nationally as the gardening incident, Nora's garden bloomed with renewed vitality. Her carefully tended roses, azaleas, and magnolias created a tapestry of color and fragrance that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds in abundance. Seated on a specially designed ergonomic garden bench that Marcus had commissioned, Nora directed a group of neighborhood children in planting a new butterfly garden section. "Remember gentle hands," she instructed a small girl struggling with a delicate seedling. "Plants are like people, they respond to kindness." At 70, with her leg fully healed, but occasionally troubling her in damp weather, Nora had found her life's third act taking an unexpected turn. The Washington Justice Foundation, established by Marcus in the wake of the incident, had transformed their family trauma into a force for community change. The foundation provided legal assistance to victims of racial injustice, advocated for police reform, and funded educational programs about civil rights. Nora, drawing on her decades as an educator, had developed a curriculum for schools about citizen rights during police encounters now being implemented in districts across Georgia. Inside the house, Marcus reviewed documents with James Wilson, who had become the Foundation's legal director. "The consent decree is final," Wilson announced, satisfaction evident in his voice. "The Oakwood Police Department will be under federal oversight for the next 5 years, with mandatory body cameras, civilian review boards, and comprehensive anti-bias training." Marcus nodded, the victory significant but bittersweet. No legal remedy could fully erase his mother's trauma or the centuries of similar injustices that had preceded it. And Rayburn's trial, Wilson's expression darkened slightly. Scheduled for next month. His defense is claiming that Caesar constituted a deadly weapon and that he acted in self-defense. But with the evidence we've gathered about his history of targeting black residents, plus Captain Reynolds' testimony, the prosecution's case is strong. The mention of Reynolds brought a complicated emotion to Marcus's face. In the months following the incident, the captain had proven true to his word, testifying frankly about the department's failures and working with the Washington Foundation on reform initiatives. He had faced backlash from fellow officers, some of whom saw him as a traitor to the Brotherhood, but he had stood firm in his commitment to change. Caesar padded into the room, now sporting a special vest, identifying him as both a therapy dog and a retired police K-9. Following the incident, the legal battle over Caesar's status had become a flashpoint in its own right. Police unions had initially pushed for him to be classified as a dangerous animal and euthanized, but public sentiment had overwhelmingly supported the dog who had protected an elderly woman from police brutality. Eventually, with support from K-9 officer associations and animal rights groups, Caesar had been officially recognized as a hero rather than a threat. The recognition had opened new doors. 3 times weekly, Caesar and Marcus visited hospitals, schools, and community centers as part of a therapy program for children affected by trauma. The Belgian Malinois, once trained to apprehend suspects, now helped young people process their fears and build resilience. The doorbell rang, and Caesar perked up, moving to the entrance with alert curiosity rather than suspicion. Marcus checked the security camera, another legacy of the incident. Karen Mitchell stood on the porch, a covered dish in her hands. Marcus hesitated before opening the door. Karen's transformation had been perhaps the most surprising aftermath of the incident. After her husband Thomas had publicly condemned her racially motivated call to police, their marriage had nearly collapsed. In the painful self-examination that followed, Karen had been forced to confront her own biases and assumptions. She had reached out to Nora during her recovery, her apology initially rebuffed. Undeterred, Karen had enrolled in implicit bias, training, joined racial justice organizations, and become a vocal advocate against racial profiling in their community. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her usual confidence muted by the weight of their history. "I brought Nora's favorite sweet potato pie for the garden club meeting." Marcus accepted the dish with polite reserve. His forgiveness came harder than his mother's, though he recognized the value of Karen's changed perspective in their ongoing community work. "She's in the backyard with the children," he said, gesturing toward the garden. Karen nodded her thanks and moved through the house, Caesar watching her go with the quiet assessment that was his nature. Through the window, Marcus observed as Karen approached his mother. There was a moment of hesitation before Nora looked up, then gestured to the empty space beside her on the bench, an invitation that spoke volumes about his mother's capacity for grace. The garden club that gathered monthly at the Washington home had become a microcosm of changing community dynamics. Walter Green, the Vietnam veteran who had witnessed the original incident, now led a veterans group that partnered with the Foundation on community improvement projects. Darius and Aisha Johnson, whose video footage had been crucial evidence, had become close friends and Foundation volunteers. Even Thomas Mitchell occasionally attended, though the strain in his marriage remained evident. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden as Marcus prepared to leave for a meeting with Captain Reynolds, now promoted to Deputy Chief of Community Relations. Their working relationship had evolved into a cautious alliance, focused on structural change rather than individual blame. Caesar would accompany him, as always, their bond only strengthened by shared trauma and purpose. As Marcus gathered his materials, his phone rang with a call from Officer Peter Collins, who had stood up to Rayburn during the incident and subsequently become an unexpected ally. Now leading the department's community outreach unit, Collins had been instrumental in implementing many of the reforms mandated by the consent decree. "Doctor, Washington just wanted to give you a heads up," Collins said without preamble. "Rayburn's attorney has submitted a plea deal offer to the DA. 10 years, with possibility of parole after 5, in exchange for guilty pleas on all charges." Marcus absorbed this information with mixed emotions. The sentence seemed inadequate for the harm caused, yet the certainty of conviction without a traumatic trial held appeal, particularly for his mother. What's the DA thinking? She's inclined to accept with our input. Says the evidence is strong, but juries can be unpredictable in police cases. Marcus thanked him for the information, promising to discuss it with his mother and their legal team. Before leaving, Marcus stopped in the garden to check on Nora. She sat surrounded by children and neighbors, her natural authority as an educator, evident in how they listened attentively to her explanation of butterfly migration patterns. Seeing her in her element, vibrant despite all she had endured, Marcus felt a surge of the fierce protective love that had driven him that fateful day. "Heading out, Mom," he called. Meeting with Reynolds about the Community Oversight Committee, Nora looked up, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. "Remember what we discussed, Marcus. Accountability, not vengeance." It was a mantra she had repeated throughout their advocacy work, a distinction that kept their efforts focused on systemic change rather than personal retribution. "I remember," he assured her. "Caesar and I will be back for dinner." As if hearing his name, the dog appeared at Marcus's side, ready, as always, for whatever came next. The drive to the police headquarters took them past the spot where Marcus had parked 6 months earlier, sneaking through backyards to reach his mother. The memory remained visceral, the fear and rage still accessible just beneath his carefully maintained professional exterior. Reynolds was waiting in the community room rather than his office, a deliberate choice that signaled his commitment to transparency. The walls displayed photos of community policing initiatives and officer diversity training. "Dr. Washington," he greeted Marcus with formal respect. "And Caesar, of course." The dog received a respectful nod, an acknowledgement of his unique status in their ongoing work. The meeting proceeded efficiently, covering progress on the consent decree requirements and plans for the Civilian Oversight Committee that would include Marcus and other community representatives. As they concluded, Reynolds hesitated before asking, "How is your mother doing really?" Marcus considered the question, looking beyond the professional relationship to the human connection. "She has nightmares sometimes, flinches at sudden movements. But she's Eleanora Washington. She's turned her pain into purpose, just like she taught me to do." Reynolds nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I still remember her classroom. How she made us feel like we mattered, every single one of us, regardless of color or background. That's rare." The moment of shared respect was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. An officer Marcus didn't recognize was being escorted out, clearly under suspension or termination. "Another Rayburn?" Marcus asked quietly. Reynolds's expression was grim but determined. "Caught tampering with body cam footage during an arrest in a predominantly black neighborhood. Under the new protocols, that's automatic suspension pending investigation." He met Marcus's gaze directly. "We're not perfect, Dr. Washington. Change comes slowly. But it is coming." As Marcus and Caesar left the building, they encountered a group of police cadets in training. The young officers, in making noticeably more diverse than previous academy classes, recognized Marcus and Caesar from their frequent appearances at community forums. One young black woman approached cautiously. "Dr. Washington, I just wanted to say that your mother's curriculum on citizen rights is part of our training now. It's making a difference in how we understand our role." The simple statement offered sincerely represented the kind of incremental progress that would, over time and with continued pressure, transform institutions from within. Back at home, Marcus found his mother hosting an impromptu dinner for the garden club members who had stayed to help with the new plantings. Karen Mitchell was setting the table. Walter Green was grilling chicken on the patio, and the Johnson couple was preparing a salad from vegetables grown in Nora's garden. The scene of community and connection, forged through shared trauma and commitment to healing, embodied his mother's vision of what neighborhoods could become. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Nora had retired to her room, Marcus sat on the porch with Caesar, watching fireflies rise from the garden. His mother had rebuilt from the soil that had once been stained with her blood. His phone buzzed with a news alert, another incident of police violence against an unarmed black citizen, this time in Michigan. The cycle continued despite their work, despite the reforms and protests and lawsuits. Caesar sensed his tension pressing against his leg in silent support. Marcus scratched behind the dog's ears, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "One day at a time, boy," he murmured. "One garden, one community, one department at a time." In her room, Nora Washington sat at her vanity, applying lotion to hands made rough by a day of gardening. The mirror reflected a face lined by 7 decades of navigating America with dignity and determination. On her nightstand lay the victim impact statement she had been preparing for Rayburn's sentencing words. She had carefully crafted to speak not just her individual truth, but the collective experience of generations who had faced similar injustices. Outside her window, the garden she had lovingly tended for 30 years stood as testament to her belief in growth and renewal, in the possibility of beauty emerging from soil enriched by struggle. Tomorrow, she would teach another group of children about butterflies and metamorphosis, about the strength required to break free from confining structures and emerge transformed. Tonight she said her prayers of gratitude for her son, for Caesar, for the community that had finally seen her fully as a human being worthy of protection and justice. In the quiet darkness of an Atlanta night, 3 survivors of America's ongoing racial reckoning rested under one roof, their individual stories now woven into the larger narrative of a nation still struggling toward its founding ideals. Their work was far from finished. The path forward neither straight nor certain. But they faced it together, armed with truth, purpose, and the hard-won wisdom that justice, while imperfect and incomplete, was still worth fighting for. What moment in this story impacted you most deeply? Was it Eleanora's courage in the face of injustice, Marcus's determination to protect his mother, or Caesar's loyalty and training saving the day? Comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it moved you. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives that reflect the ongoing struggle for equality and justice in America. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember, change begins in our own communities, one conversation, one action, one garden at a time. This powerful story illuminates how racial bias operates through systems, not just individuals. Officer Rayburn wasn't simply a bad apple. He was enabled by institutional protection despite previous complaints. The Washington family's ordeal demonstrates how privilege determines who receives justice and who faces danger in everyday situations like gardening. Eleanora's dignity throughout her trauma showcases the resilience many Black Americans develop through generations of navigating unjust systems. Marcus's position as a respected neurosurgeon didn't shield his mother from racism, highlighting how professional achievement doesn't overcome systemic bias. Caesar represents how systems designed for control can be repurposed for protection when guided by justice. The community's response, from Reynolds's awakening to Karen's transformation, shows how witnessing injustice can catalyze change, though real progress requires institutional reform beyond individual growth. Most importantly, Nora's journey from victim to advocate exemplifies turning personal pain into community healing. The Washington Justice Foundation embodies the truth that lasting change requires both accountability and forward-looking policy reform. This story reminds us that justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoers, but creating systems where such violations become unthinkable through collective vigilance and institutional transformation. What would you have done if you witnessed what happened to Eleanora Washington in her garden that day? Would you have filmed like the Johnsons, intervened like Officer Collins, or remained silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Has racial profiling affected you or someone you know? Your stories matter in this ongoing conversation about justice in America. If this story moved, you please hit that like button to help it reach others who need to hear these difficult truths. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that shine light on the experiences many face daily but few discuss openly. By sharing this video, you become part of the solution, sparking conversations that lead to greater understanding and change in your own communities. Thank you for listening with an open heart and mind. Together, we can build a society where gardening while Black isn't dangerous, where Caesar's protection isn't necessary, and where dignity is everyone's birthright regardless of skin color.